Hey folks, welcome to the review on imaginary numbers. An imaginary number is always called I, and that I is equal to the square root of -1. Now, if I were to take that square root of -1 and square it, we know that squares and square roots undo each other, so that's just going to leave me with the -1 that was on the inside. So I squared is the same thing as -1. If I had an I cubed, where I had 3 of these i's, maybe a good way to do this would be to do I times I squared. Well, we already know that I squared is -1, so if we leave the I alone and replace I squared with -1, we're going to have a negative I. If we had I to the 4th, then we would have maybe something like I squared times I squared. That's not the only option. I squared we already know is -1, so this would be -1 times itself, which is the same thing as +1. Now, if we continue in this same token and we run to I to the 5th power, maybe a good option here would be an I squared times an I cubed. Well, we know that that is a -1 times a negative I. Negative times negative is positive, so we just simply have an I. And that's interesting because I has been used before. That was used back here when we had the original I. So let's continue on with I to the 6th power. Maybe you would like to use an I to the 4th times I squared for a total of 6 i's. Well, we know that I to the 4th is 1. We know that I squared is -1. So therefore, this is going to be -1. And again, I've seen this before. I've seen that over here at I squared. If we continue on, maybe you are already starting to see the pattern. And we would say maybe for I to the 7, we could use an I cubed times an I to the 4th. This is going to equal a negative I, which, yes, is continuing on in that same pattern. For I to the 8th, maybe you would want to use an I to the 4th times I to the 4th, which is just simply going to be 1. And now what you're starting to see, hopefully, is that I have a pattern. I have I, -1, negative I, 1, and that pattern is repeated. I, -1, negative I, 1. And I've kind of shown this on this circle over here. We start out with I to the 1st, and then we go to I squared, which we know is -1. The next thing is going to be I cubed, which is negative I, and then we go to I to the 4th, which is the same thing as 1. And then we start our pattern over again. And so this is going to keep repeating itself over and over and over and over again. So that my pattern of numbers is I, -1, negative I, +1, go back to the beginning over and over.